Hi, I'm Dr. David Day of Samurai Digital Security, and this is 404 Cybersecurity Not Found, tearing cybersecurity a new arse since 2015.
Hello everybody, we're joined today by Dr. David Day, who's the Managing Director of Samurai Digital Security.
I believe that I'm here today to talk about the problems that are caused by working from home, by us moving away from our offices and moving into our kitchens and working from our kitchen tables, and what the cybersecurity consequences of that might be.
Great, so what should we be worried about?
It's people, isn't it? It's us as individuals, and that was the problem prior to moving into our home offices and our working from our kitchen tables, and it's still the problem now that we have moved, now that they have gone remote. That hasn't changed. In fact, it's even more so now, I would argue, because as an organisation, there's an element of control that you have over the individuals within your workforce. As soon as they move remotely, although it has been shown that from a remote working point of view, employees can be trusted, all of a sudden you start to lose a bit of control. And I don't mean control as in obviously people control, but I mean control in terms of technology, in terms of policy, in terms of processes. All of a sudden we're in situations where employees are using their own devices. That can cause a problem, particularly if it's their own personal devices, and those devices are being used not just for work purposes.
I mean, we use devices for personal use every day. There doesn't seem to be much perceived risk to that, so why is it a problem using that for business?
The point is perceived. Perceived risk is very different from actual risk. When you do look at these things at home, there is every chance or likelihood, and I'm sure some people have had this, where their machines have become infected or they've just really slowed down, and you're like, why is it running so slow? Well, there's a good chance it's running so slow because there's some malware on your machine that could be doing a number of different things, mostly, to be fair, quite benign. Targeted advertising is probably what's going on in the background, but there can be much more significant things than that, which is fine if you're just connected to your, if it's just your laptop, you've got some malware on your device, and the consequences of that is on you, your own personal machine and your own personal files and your own personal data. Now that's painful, of course, but it isn't as painful, is it, as being in a situation where you're also infecting the server at work and the database at work stops being functional, or ransomware infects thousands of endpoints and your corporate server. Obviously, you can imagine that is significantly more dire than just one machine going down. So this is where my fear comes from, that all of a sudden the threats that used to attack us as individuals now has opened up, and we are giving an opportunity, a vector for bad guys to get in via endpoints.
So what kinds of policies and procedures can businesses follow to help secure devices for their employees working from home?
Okay, well, I think there's a couple of things in that. The first one is, are we going to be comfortable with employees using their own devices? Are we going to allow them to have a sort of a bring your own device policy? It's pretty common for that to happen, particularly with smaller organisations that their own units, their own laptops, their own mobile phones are being used for business. If you are significantly worried about that, it's something that I would recommend minimizing. Obviously, if you have a laptop and it's built to a certain configuration and it is shipped out to your employees for remote working, or they have laptops which they were using at work before anyway, which can quite comfortably used at home, that's probably a lot more sensible than just allowing somebody to use the family laptop that that their children are using as well, maybe, and visiting all manner of different websites and so forth, which could pose a problem. We can still have some level of control and some level of vision over the device if it's a corporate unit, And if that isn't the case, if and this is for everybody to make their own decisions about, really. But if there's a decision that we're going to allow people to use their own devices, then we need to be sensible about that. We need to ensure that the environment that they're working from is secure, that the laptop that they're using is secure. And there's a few ways that can be done. Obviously, pretty high up on that list is endpoint security. Nothing that you wouldn't expect here, but you would want, even if it's an individual's own laptop, you'd want corporate anti-malware, corporate antivirus on that device. And we can be in a situation where, as a administrator, you can have eyes on all of the laptops that are interacting with your environment by using something. For example, and this is one of many, but we quite like the use of Bitdefender Gravity Zone and the installation of, say, Bitdefender onto a number of endpoints, which is then managed and observed through Gravity Zone to give visibility on if any of those laptops have any issues, if there's problems with them in terms of the patching, whether the antivirus and the firewall is operating correctly, whether anybody's downloaded any malware, whether any malicious software has snuck on there. They're pretty impressive products, and they can be installed onto most endpoints, including mobile devices as well. So if a decision has been made that we're going to allow people to use their own devices, we should certainly get that software on there. And if if we decided that we're going to use our own corporate devices, then again we need that kind of endpoint security on there too.
What other security concerns are there for the business? Does opening up VPNs cause any threats?
Yes, it does. Having said that, I think it's important that we do use VPNs. We do have virtual private networks as a method of, and let's make the distinction here. There's the term VPN is used in two ways. It's used in one way to talk about anonymizing your visibility on the internet to certain websites, etc. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is creating a private tunnel between your own endpoint device and the corporate service, corporate network that you're using, whether that's on-premise in an office somewhere, or whether it's in the cloud with Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS or whatever it might be. That sort of secure encrypted secured portal. If you have a situation where you have malware on your device, and that malware then spreads through that VPN onto corporate devices, clearly that's when we're in spot of bother. So it increases the importance, if we have that remote connectivity, that we do get things right in terms of the device and the device's security. And in terms of VPN, we can have an acceptable use policy. You could whitelist the IP addresses that are coming in. And to be fair, it's pretty static now. The IP addresses through most, even home systems, even sort of home network systems, the IP addresses don't change that often. So you could whitelist people's home IP addresses. You can obviously set the VPN up so only certain usernames and passwords can connect, and this brings up another point as well about the importance of making sure that passwords aren't shared. So if we are in a situation where a user is connecting via a VPN, that particular user's password isn't shared with, say, anybody else in the family, you certainly wouldn't want anybody else connecting over that VPN. So I think a set of rules, if you like, a set of policies around how VPNs are going to be used is critical. Only the acceptable users, only acceptable IP addresses, only acceptable laptops are going to be able to make that connection. And when I say acceptable, I'm talking about ones that have the appropriate endpoint detection on them and that are well patched and well maintained. And compliance and monitoring should be part of that policy. A sort of a heads up to the people that are connecting to the corporate network from home that we are going to be keeping an eye on your machine, and we're going to be ensuring that you're doing what you should. And if you don't, we'll be making some phone calls to you to try to find out what's gone wrong.
So you mentioned passwords. What are your thoughts on regular password changes? Is it necessary? And what other things can we do to make our passwords more secure?
In terms of frequency of changing them, it's a pretty hot topic, and experts will disagree with this. I think the bottom line is if we're comfortable with the fact that nobody ever used the same password over multiple accounts, then there would be less of an issue. We can't make assumptions that people are going to do the right things. We will train them to, we would advise them to, but ultimately we have to accept the fact that that isn't always enough. And sometimes we have to do what we can to try to protect ourselves from people not doing what they're supposed to do. So in my view, I do think that passwords should be changed. I don't think they should be changed very frequently, because you force people to keep changing passwords, and then we move into the position where people forget what the password was that they just changed to, or they managed to lock themselves out because it's recently changed, and they didn't record it appropriately, and then of course that causes a problem for IT administrators as well. But if that password has been shared on another account, and that account somewhere on some website has had a breach or a leak, and that has been leaked online, maybe on the dark web or wherever, and it's found its way into those lists, then obviously that opens up a threat to your organization if they have that user's password. And even if that password is tied to a user's personal account, quite often it isn't difficult to use a bit of open source intelligence to determine, where that person works from their personal account, to identify what their work email would be, then trying the same password, and then obviously getting access that way. So I do think that risk is reduced by changing the passwords. It's just that balancing act, isn't it, between changing them so frequently that your IT team get an awful lot of calls about people who have managed to lock themselves out, weighed up against the potential threat of that password being out there in the wild and being used. I think 2 or 3 months changing is perhaps that happy medium, if you like. I mean, Microsoft themselves have sort of they came out, I think, and said at some point that they felt that the necessity for frequent password changing wasn't a good idea, but there's many reasons why at least changing your password even infrequently isn't a bad idea. So I would say perhaps somewhere around the sort of 8 to 12 weeks, 2 to 3 months range is sensible. And with regard to the creation of passwords, we're in situations now where there's no reason why, as a company, as an organization, you couldn't have a company-wide password manager. If you've used password managers before, pretty much the same as your own personal one, but you can get corporate versions of these where individual users can store their individual passwords, and also you can use that to enable the passwords to be secure. The password manager themselves can create the password, which will often be nonsensical gibberish characters. It doesn't matter because you don't need to remember it. So if you're using something like LastPass as an example, you can you just have that running, and it's one password, and it will oftentimes even autofill the passwords for you. So I'd certainly, one of the things you could be looking at would be company-wide password managers. That would be certainly one way to go. And obviously the other thing you can do as well is you can ensure you can have password policies which will prevent the use of simpler passwords or repeated passwords. It's a pretty simple thing to do in with the password policy settings within group policy and on other operating systems as well. You can configure that quite easily, and I'd recommend that you do. Passwords is still very, very high on the list of issues and reasons for breaches, and to be fair, even more so now with remote working being much more common.
So what else can people do to secure their accounts?
Well, from a password perspective, again, as well, is multi-factor authentication. Hopefully, we're reasonably familiar with that. You may have heard that expression, or the expression two-factor authentication. Obviously, it's a case of, there being more than one way of determining your identity. So there's your password, but as we know, passwords do end up on leaked lists, and these lists are huge, to be fair. And obviously other ways of access is through brute force as well, trying to brute force the passwords, and some success can be had with those too. And obviously multi-factor authentication is one of the ways you can get around that, through either some, biometric devices can do this, as we've seen with thumbprints or on mobile phones, or retina scans or facial recognition, but other ways as well. I think probably one of the more robust of those is the authenticator apps that you can have on your phone. SMS, I'm very nervous of. Text messages aren't secure at all. I mean, anybody can send anybody a text message, and fraudulently make it appear that it's come from a different phone number. So the SMS things make me nervous. But there's Microsoft have an authenticator app, Google have an authenticator app, where the service allows you to use those. You should use them, and hopefully, as we move forward, more and more companies will allow you to do that. They do make it more awkward. They do make it more painful. There's devices you can buy, bits of hardware you can buy as well that can where you can add an extra level of protection.
What do you think the biggest cause of concern should be in terms of breach types, and what should we do to counter them?
We've talked a little bit about how to counter some of them using technology, but a big part of it, of course, is to make sure individuals are adopting appropriate behaviour. We can't assume they always will, but you can be pretty certain they won't if you don't tell them how to behave appropriately. It's not their job to be experts in cybersecurity. Maybe they weren't taken on for that. That's not their role. We are at a point now where responsibility needs to be shared. With having such a dispersed workforce now, working from multiple locations, huge benefits of that, of course, but also additional threats, and the responsibility needs to be shared between the corporation, the organization, the company, and their employees. Individuals have to take a little bit of responsibility for their own actions, but they need to be guided, and they need to be guided with training, and they need to be guided with policies. So I think the emphasis is become even stronger now on user awareness training, and on how to make sure that the devices that they're connecting through to the corporate network don't become compromised, and that they're treated in a professional manner. So we need the appropriate documentation and policies need to be placed, but also we need to ensure that people are reading those policies and processes. And so I think a little bit of online training, and maybe a little bit of online quizzing as well, just to make sure people aren't looking at their phone when they're pretending to be watching a video, explaining what they need to do. And when people tick off a box on a policy to say they've read it, why not have that box grayed out until they pass 5 or 6 questions on that policy, just to make sure they have read it?
Really, it comes down to the culture, doesn't it? Which for us at Samurai, really easy to instill. It's our second nature to think about that. But what advice would you give to other business owners looking to instill a culture of security first?
I would say that for anybody who works as a CISO, a chief security officer, or even if you don't have a dedicated cybersecurity individual, even somebody who like IT managers, for example, you need to almost understand the psychology of people a little bit to understand what needs to be said to motivate them to do the right thing. I think a little bit of carrot and a little bit of stick sometimes goes a long way. So I'll give you an example of that. Obviously, phishing is a significant threat, and probably even more so now. And we've heard numerous stories since the first lockdown over COVID type phishing scams, including the scam about click here to get your vaccine, and then either the link goes to a malicious software site that infects you with malware, or it asks for a small payment of £10 or something like that to go towards the NHS, and then just harvests your empties your bank account, harvests your credentials. We need to sort of make sure that people understand what those risks are, and that it's not, it's not the Nigerian prince anymore. It's not a joke anymore. The sophistication behind these is great. People aren't going to understand that unless it's explained to them. I think it's quite handy sometimes to actually talk about breaches that have happened, security incidents that have happened, and the information's out there, right? If you talk through a scenario where some individual has ended up giving away, bank account details of the corporation to somebody they shouldn't have done. A supplier has fraudulently, or rather, somebody's purporting to be a supplier, has sent through account details saying, "Hey, they've been changed to this now. Please, can you pay the invoice to X or Y?" And we've seen that happening. So all of these potential risks that are out there, we need to make all employees aware of them, and to be vigilant for them. You can actually have phishing campaigns, something we can do, others do it too. But you can have phishing campaigns where we will actually try to phish your staff. And obviously, if they fall for our phishes, it's not malicious, there's nothing bad will happen. However, it does give you an indication of the scale of the problem from your side in terms of how whether people need training or not. Two things you can do. You can either not tell people that this exercise is happening, in which case you get some good data in terms of the state of play as it is then, or the other way you can do it, and both ways can work, is you say, listen, we're going to be running this campaign, we're not going to tell you when we're going to run it, and we're going to run it over a year. So if you spot a phishing email that's come through as part of this campaign, and let us know, and you're the first person to tell us, you'll get, I don't know, a bottle of wine. Let's offer a carrot, some incentive, make a game out of it. However, if you miss it, we're going to be asking you, or you fall for it and click on it, we'll be asking you what it was that happened. How did you fall for that? And so that there is things you could do, as you said, Brad. You can shift the culture. It's getting that message across, and sometimes if you can make it fun or you can make it exciting, as best you can, that can help. Sometimes a little bit of fear doesn't hurt. Letting people know what the consequences of getting it wrong would be, and some case studies of where it has gone wrong. But it's just getting that message out to employees, getting the policies put together, getting them visible, ensuring that people read them, and ensuring that people are appropriately trained in what the risks are, and then any residual problems that happen, make sure you've got the technology in place to mop that up, to make sure that you put things in place to deal with, for want of a better word, the ignorance of or stupidity with some people of their behaviours. So endpoint security is great. Put group policies in place, which could either be through cloud services. Microsoft 365 has policies that you can put in place now as well in security and compliance, and deal with the people, and then put the technology in place as well in case the people thing doesn't work, which, let's be honest, a few are going to fall through the net there, aren't they? So put the technologies in place. Anti-phishing solutions are there to try to catch people who get it wrong. That will actually check a link to see if it's malicious before it actually allows the connection to be made. And we work with certain partners that can help with that. A Bitdefender can help with that. We work with a partner, Aquil AI, that can help with that too. So there is things that we can put in place to try to counter daft.
When we're looking at potential risks, I see two potential options. There are preventative actions and reactive actions. What are the benefits of going down each route? Which one should we do?
If it's preventative, then we're not in trouble, right? If you catch it before it happens, but you also need to accept the fact that it's not a case of if you're going to get breached. It's a case of when you're going to get breached, and the actions that we need to take are ones that reduce the frequency that you get breached and reduce the impact of when you get breached. So if we can get the frequency to very low and we can get the impact to very low, then the consequence is obviously a lot less if somebody doesn't do what they're supposed to do. So obviously both things need to be in place, both reactive. If something goes wrong, we need a plan, right? So if you came in the morning and turned on, you had a look at the corporate network and found out that 2/3 of your machines had ransomware installed upon them, a situation which unfortunately, when we get phoned up to help people out when they're in trouble, we come across quite regularly. You need to have a plan. What are you going to do? Who are you going to call? What's the first thing you're going to do? And if the first thing you're going to do is sort of stand up and run in circles, screaming and shouting, then that's not great. You need to go, oh, okay, we're in trouble here. Right. Where's my list? What do I start with? Action point number 1. Who are the people that are involved in the containment phase? Who are the people that are involved in the investigation phase? Who's going to be involved in the eradication phase? So they're which are essentially the 3 parts of incidents. You have to contain the incident to make sure it doesn't spread any further. Investigate what's happened, because if you don't investigate and know what's happened and put the appropriate measures in place, there's nothing to stop it happening again, right? And then thirdly, you've got to eradicate it and obviously remove the malware or the problem or the infections or whatever's happened. And also, within the investigation phase, you'd need to inform whoever you'd need to inform under due diligence, potentially your clients or the stakeholders, the Information Commissioner's Office, potentially as well. It can be messy, but the more that you put in place to manage that process when the worst happens, then the less trouble that you're going to be in. And I think people can be quite forgiving when you've had a breach if you show that you have done everything you're supposed to do, that you've been diligent, that you've made best efforts. I think people can be quite forgiving, but they're less forgiving if it's a really simple breach that's happened, and it's happened because the appropriate training wasn't given or the appropriate systems weren't put in place, and data's been leaked which belongs to clients or stakeholders or other individuals. I think that they're quite within their rights to be annoyed if you haven't been taking proper care of their data. So there's that side of it. The preventative side of it, of course. You want to make your system not very inviting to attackers, and the more defenses you have around your data, then the less likelihood is that you're going to have to put into place Plan B, the reactionary incident response side.
I'm sure I speak for many people at Samurai. It's about protecting people, right, and protecting businesses. And I want to ask this question directly to you, Dave. I've never asked it to you before. Why did you get into cybersecurity?
I always had a fascination with people getting access to things that they shouldn't. It was terrible, right? A truly awful, and some of you may remember it if you're as old as me, a truly awful TV show that used to be on called Whiz Kids, I think it was called. And I think that was in the 80s, in the early 80s, in fact. And I remember watching that, and these kids were like hacking into the term hacking wasn't particularly it had a different meaning back then, but they were hacking into sort of traffic light systems and all kinds, changing their homework grades, all the typical stuff. And at the time I was learning to code. I was like about 10 or 11, and I was learning to code, doing some just basic programming on my Dragon 32. And I got interested in it, and that sort of carried on, if you like, as I went through college and university. And then the actual viruses themselves became a thing. Terminated stay resident, TSRs, we used to call them, as ways of propagating, spreading malicious software. And I mean, I can remember sort of in the late 80s, sort of screens made to look like login screens, and grabbing hold of academics' usernames and passwords. as I got older, you start to see the damage that can be done. You know, it becomes more serious. I mean, and I think that was brought to a head really with what happened with WannaCry in the NHS. I mean, you know, that literally was putting people's lives in danger. You know, operations were being pushed back because of it. I mean, I won't go into what the potential consequences of that could be or even were, but you can use your imagination. So that sort of pushed really harder. So there was a technical puzzle of it. There was the initially as a kid, because teenagers are always a bit like that, aren't they? There was the sort of the, you know, can you get access to something you shouldn't be accessing? But then, you know, as I matured and grew up, you know, I realised that the actual sleepless nights, and I've seen them, CEOs and managers have had over this, and so now I'm in a place where I just want to make sure that people are safe, really, because it's about control, I think. And I think if you feel you're on top of it and you feel in control of it, it won't worry you. But it's difficult to feel in control of something that you don't fully understand and you don't really fully appreciate the risks, to be able to highlight those risks, explain those risks, and then put in place the measures to you know, to save you from discomfort and fear. I think's, you know, a good thing.
Well, thanks for your time, Dave. Your answers have been incredibly insightful, and I'm sure there will be to many of the listeners. Do you have any final comments or closing words?
Look after your employees, because it's a very difficult time for them, and you know, that, like I say, the responsibility to remain cyber secure falls with both the organisation and the employees. But you know, you have to empower them to be doing the right thing, and you have to ensure that if they don't, you know, you've got systems in place to sort of, you know, catch them when they fall down, so to speak. So yeah, just look after you guys.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave.
No worries.
To everyone else, see you next week.
This podcast was brought to you by Samurai Digital Security, purveyors of cybersecurity solutions. Find us at samuraisecurity.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. Samurai Security, tearing cybersecurity a new arse since 2015.